All right. Hello, everybody. I am very excited for this discussion today on The Severing Sun. This is the first book in. Now, is this going to be a trilogy? Is this going to be
Yes,
a trilogy? Yes. Okay. This is a trilogy. The Severing Sun, the first book in, and you'll have to forgive me, Vaughn. I
that's
forgot.
all right. The Sundered Nation
Yes, the
Trilogy.
Sundered Nation Trilogy. Yes, I was going to look it up, but that was faster. So, the Sundered Nation Trilogy. And I am so delighted to have here as my guest to discuss his book, the author, Vaughn Roycroft. Hello, Vaughn. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me, Philip. It's
Ah,
wonderful to be with you.
pleasure is mine. I am so excited. I recently reviewed The Severing Sun and had the immense privilege of doing the cover reveal for the book. And here it is in all its glory. It is a beautiful cover. You must be
Oh,
very happy with this.
I'm thrilled. I mean, I knew the artist's work. His name is John Anthony Di Giovanni,
Yeah.
and I knew his work, but I mean, it literally stole my breath. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it was just like full gasp, and then because it was so stunningly beautiful the first time I looked at it.
I believe it. And I saw the cover because you had given me an arc. I was reading a book with a different cover, this
Right.
book, but different cover, and I hadn't seen it until I had finished the book. And when I saw the cover, I was also very just like, wow, this is perfect. I saw characters that I know and love,
Yeah.
and I was like, yes, this is such a perfect cover
That
for
was kind of a unique situation for you to be far enough in to know who you're looking at
yeah.
as you look at the cover.
Yeah, yeah, it was really cool to see that. It was
Cool.
something very special about it too when I saw the individuals that I could identify there because as I said, I had come to love the characters, which is a really very important sign for a book that
Oh,
your
absolutely.
readers love your characters. So
It's one of my most important things as a reader. So it's what I aspire to write character driven work. Of course, I want to have a nice plot and world building and all the rest of it, but character is first and foremost for me.
yeah, yeah. Well, it certainly feels that way. You
Oh, good.
succeeded very well. And by the way, everybody, we are keeping this spoiler free for the moment. We might wander into spoilers. I will give everyone a warning if and when we do that. But right now, no worries. If you have not read Severing Sun, you're just curious, you want to hear about it, no spoilers at this point in the discussion. So I have to ask you, and I know that authors probably get sick of this question, but since this is your first published book, right?
Right.
This is your debut, so you
Mhm.
can't be sick of it just yet. But
Right.
I love finding out about an author's influences, and I think it tells me not everything, obviously, but it can tell you some interesting things, I think, about what to expect from the read. So if you don't mind me asking, I know authors who are like, oh, not the influence question,
Oh, no, no, I don't mind at all.
but I think it's okay for you, right? Because this
Yeah,
is
it's a big part of who I am as a writer.
yeah,
And for me, it all starts with Tolkien and
yeah.
reading the Lord of the Rings when I did as a boy, really started everything for me.
Mm.
I had a great teacher in the sixth grade named Mr. Raymond,
Yeah.
and he was a first year teacher, and we had just our school was bursting at the seams, so they added these portable classrooms. Have you ever seen these? They're like double wide trailers, sort of.
I have. I've seen those.
And we they moved a group of us out to this portable, and he put him in charge. And I think the idea was these are a bunch of kids that are doing pretty well, so that'll be easy for you. You just yeah, I think that was the idea behind it, because
Mm.
we were all kind of in the same vein, so to speak, and reading wise and stuff. So he divided us for our reading course into groups and asked us who wanted to read what. And one of the choices was The Hobbit. and I didn't know anything really about it, but about 5 of us took The Hobbit, and he just said, okay, read. And he allocated an hour in class or whatever to reading. And I took it home and just tore through it. Just loved the feeling of being immersed in it. And I finished so quickly that I think he thought, well, how am I going to keep this kid busy now? So he went to the store and bought a box set of The Lord of the Rings for me.
Wow.
Out of his own pocket, which commendable for a first-year teacher in the 1970s to reach into his pocket and buy a box set of books for a kid. And he would allocate, like he would meet with me maybe I think once a week, and we would chat about where I was and what was going on. And he was a big Tolkien fan himself.
Ah, okay.
And so at some point, as I was reading Return of the King, during one of our meetings, I was talking about how the riders of Rohan were coming to Gondor's aid, and he just threw out this speculation that it was sort of like a tribute state situation, like the Goths were to the Romans at one point. And so that line, I mean, just I latched onto that. As you can imagine, an 11-year-old, Goths, what's this? And my brother had a World Heritage textbook at home, and I was looking up the Goths, and there was a map that showed the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, and how, and it said something about the Goths were the first to lay siege and sack the city of Rome.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if they were tributes for Gondor, I mean Rome, how did this come about? So it all took off from there, and that's how I ended up with sort of an alternative version of the Goths after all that.
The Gotar.
Yeah. Guitar-y.
Gotari, yes, of course. Yeah.
Some outsiders do call them the Gotar, though. So you didn't miss out. That's used. So
I am an outsider, technically speaking. So yeah, that is so cool. The Gotari, and they're two main clans we meet: the Amalus clan, the lions, and then the Wolfus clan, the wolves.
Yes.
Nice.
And those are based on real royal, they call them royal clans within the Goths, and the division of the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths sort of fell apart on those two leadership lines. So that's the idea behind the Sundered Nation.
Yeah.
Is that they're going to split. And it's the genesis of the idea, but it's not this is not historically accurate by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. You're not writing history, you're writing fantasy here.
Definitely.
With some historical influences.
Absolutely. And I found so many things that I thought, well, that's got to go in the book. I mean, I read probably, a couple dozen books about just the Germanic tribes and the Goths and the fall of Rome and all those sorts of things. And I would just jot down things that I thought fit in the story. And I did that for, probably about 2 years before I ever wrote word one on the story.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's some serious preparation then. Yeah.
Well, I was in a position where I had, my wife and I owned a business together, and we decided to sell it. It was kind of one of those life's too short moments. We were in our early 40s, and we just wanted to do things that we loved and use our creativity. And I was doing carpentry, and I thought, well, I also kind of always had this writing dream. Why don't I explore that as like a side gig? Because in carpentry, a lot of times, a rainy day and an outdoor project, they just don't go together. So you get a lot of downtime. And over the winter and so forth, I didn't work nearly as much. And so I did a lot of that work during those times, because it was always just kind of like out there, like, yeah, one of these days I'm going to write that book.
Right.
And I finally did. And it coincided with a shoulder injury that I got that it was debilitating from a carpentry standpoint, but I was able to sit at a keyboard and click away. So
Tap, tap.
yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So lifelong aspiration that you acted on. That's I think a good lesson for all of us. Go for it. Don't wait too long, you know?
Definitely. Yeah. And it was definitely one of those things where I never felt like I was ready. And I just started and I still didn't feel like I was ready. And it just, the story itself started flowing. And I thought, what do I need to be ready? This is the story's coming. You know, I didn't need to be a historian or to know every detail of that world or time in order to invent a fantasy story. So I would recommend that as well. Just go for it.
Yeah, you can always come up with reasons to delay.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You never start getting good at writing until you actually start writing. So,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Are there any other fantasy authors that you would include along with Tolkien as being important influences for you?
You know, it's funny. I think largely because of my parents, who were both big readers, especially my mom. After Tolkien, I didn't go down too many fantasy rabbit holes. I read Le Guin fairly young, or just Earthsea.
You like me.
You know, I just did not. My mom would hand me books that she thought I liked, and she knew I liked historicals and sweeping epics. And I remember she handed me. Are you familiar with the Far Pavilions?
No.
MMK. It was set in 19th century India, and it's very immersive, very sweeping, epic tale of a little boy who during one of the uprisings against the British, a British boy was adopted by an Indian woman who had worked in the household when his parents were both killed. And he is totally immersed in this world of the Raj, and he considers himself an Indian. I mean, he considers himself part of that world. And then at about the time he comes of age, he finds out that he is related to this kind of a noble, I don't think they were royals, but they were a wealthy landed family in Great Britain. And he goes home and is educated and comes back as part of the British Army.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then he's, of course, meets up with people he knew from before through circumstance, and he's assigned as a guardian for a young woman's wedding. She has to be transported from one part of the country to another, and there's a big caravan, and he is her guardian. And of course, they fall in love.
Well, shocker. Yeah.
So that story, I mean, I can look back at that story and say, well, that sure made an imprint on me, because there's a lot of elements in there that I can recognize in myself.
Yeah.
And you know, other books that were sweeping like that, Pillars of the Earth.
Oh yeah, Ken Follett. Yeah.
And John Jakes, my mom was a fan of the Bastard series, which was people on both sides of the Revolutionary War related to one another. And then he did the same thing with North and South, which was the Civil War. I don't know if you remember, that was even actually made into a mini series on television at one point, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I do have, that does ring a bell, actually. Yeah.
And then because I grew up in Michigan, and I loved Indian, American Indian, indigenous people stories. And there was a fellow named Alan Eckert who wrote a book called The Frontiersman. It was about Simon Kenton, who he considered to be more notable to history than say Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone. And so he wrote this massive, I think it's about 1,000 pages, sprawling, but it's a very story-like autobiography of Simon Kenton. And I've reread it recently, and it's a little tough for me to read just as a writer now. But it was a great story for me as a kid because it showed me how immersive historical details can be, if you follow me.
Yes, I do. I do.
And Simon Kenton was captured by the Shawnees and held as a prisoner among them. It's similar to Dances with Wolves, if you know a similar story, in that someone who is a fighter of Indians learns that, oh, wow, these people have their own culture, and I haven't been seeing that. I've been, and it's a fantastic story. The book a little tough, I would say, to read these days. It's just very kind of archaically written.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Anyway. Sometimes, the prose has definitely changed in the last 50 years to favor, I think, a faster pace for one thing. Yeah. But that's fantastic. And so you already mentioned that the Goths were a real, and I'm glad you said that because I said that in my review, and I was thinking, what if I'm wrong?
No, you were spot on.
Okay, good. So the Gotari are indeed inspired by the Goths. I'm very curious, though, in a non-spoiler way, what about the Scolani?
So...
And these, by the way, I mentioned this in the review, and I think it's even on the back here. So it's not really a spoiler, but the Scolani are, in fact, a tribe of women warriors. They're very Amazonian, and it's the easiest comparison, I think, right?
Yeah. So I had read Stephen Pressfield wrote a book called The Last Amazon in the mid-90s, and I had been a Pressfield fan. He wrote about the Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Can't think of the name of that book, but that's how I got into him. But The Last Amazon I just thought was fantastically transportive and immersive. And that kind of stuck with me a little bit. But I was actually reading, and you're a medievalist, I was reading a writing of a Goth named Jordanes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And he Gattaca, is that the name of the piece? I believe it's
right.
Yeah. But it was someone, a Gothic living in Constantinople in Byzantine times, I think 6th century, maybe 7th.
Okay.
Hired Jordanes to write the history of the Goths, and I thought, well, I got to read that, and I did. It was a little bit, in those days, exaggeration was very common, and Jordanes did some big exaggeration. One of his claims was that the Goths were responsible for the Egyptians building the pyramids. So
it might be a slight exaggeration somewhere in there.
But one of the things that he also claimed was that when the Greeks discovered the Amazons on the northern shores of the Pontian, the Black Sea, the reason that they found those women there and that they were so warlike and fierce was because they had been the wives of Goths who had gotten in boats and gone across the sea to fight a war against the Persians. So these were the lost wives of a subclan of the Goths. That's who the Amazons were. They were, of course, they're Gothic women. What else could they be? They're shield maidens. So once I saw that, I knew I had to include a female warrior sect, and I guess I have to give my wife some credit here because she is an inspiration to that in a way. She's always been kind of my fiercest guardian, and she's extremely competent. And I just thought, well, this protagonist of mine has to have a competent female to kind of show him the way here. So that's how the Scolani were born.
Nice. How is your wife with a bow?
You know what, if she set her mind to it, archery would be her thing, but it's not, but it could be, I tell you.
Horse riding?
Yeah, we've done the horse thing. We don't,
Okay.
my brother was a big rider, so yeah, we know a little bit about the equestrian world. But
Yeah, well, that shows in here. Obviously, the horses are particularly important to the Scolani. And
exactly. And
yeah.
I know there's a lot of American Indian influence in there, and that goes back to the Alan Eckhart books, which I didn't say, but I started with the Frontiersman, but I think I read his entire catalog, which I got to believe there's at least a dozen books about that era and that time, and mostly in the Midwest, mostly set in the Midwest, the Middle West, and Canada, but
Okay.
about the French and Indian War through to the last of the Black Hawk Wars in Illinois and Wisconsin, with the U.S. against Black Hawk. But those were, I just tore through those. I couldn't get enough of that stuff, and indigenous tribes culture is definitely, I think I feel it in the Scolani. I mean, just the fact that they're somewhat nomadic and they rely so heavily on their horses, and they take scalps.
Yeah, I noticed the scalping thing, which is, yeah, I mean that historically, I believe, right, that it was the Europeans who brought that practice to
Yes,
North America, actually.
exactly.
And it's interesting what you do with that here too, because it has plot nuances to it as well, which I can't get into really yet, but
Right.
it is a very important part of the story in some respects. But the horses, wonderful job with that,
Well,
and
thank you.
the idea that a horse is your best friend, right?
Yeah,
Because you have a connection with you have a bond with this creature, but also your life depends on this horse
yeah,
in many situations, not
right.
just battle, but including battle.
Yeah,
Uh, so you depend on it for transportation to get you from one place to another. You're in big trouble in many contexts without that friend.
exactly.
Yeah.
I loved the idea too, and it came to me as I went along, that that you would introduce a Scolani girl to her friend at a young age, and that the two of you would come up together, because horses can live a fairly long life, and as a young warrior would come of age, her horse would probably be in prime condition to perform that role.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, it makes total sense. And can also make for some very intense plot moments as well. So
Oh,
yeah.
good, thank you.
Yeah, I think it was a good choice. So you had we have the Gotari, we have the Scolani, you have some other cultures in there as well. And we want to,
Spali and the Spali,
yeah, the
are
Spali and the Carpins.
and the Carpins are both based on, just really roughly on, the Spali are based on the Scythians, um, which were a nomadic peoples that the Greeks and the Romans both encountered the Scyths,
Yeah,
and they were also very dependent on the horse,
right.
and they raiding was a big part of their culture, from what I found in research. And that was another thing that Jourdain's mentioned, that when the Goths migrated south, they had to overpower the mighty Spali nation that lived in the lands north of the Black Sea, and he never explains who the Spali are.
Or the
So
Scythians.
I just took it upon myself to
You're
to
explaining then who they are.
assign a culture to them. Yeah,
Oh, cool. So that's actually an historical word that
it's
at
a
least,
word from the Goths, apparently, or Jourdain's at least claims that Spali is a Gothic word, but I can't find it. I have a couple of Gothic dictionaries. We know the Gothic language fairly well because it was
yeah,
translated into the Bible was
Bible.
translated
Yeah.
into Gothic.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a Bible.
Wolfius, I think, was
I
the
think that's
translator.
correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I don't read Gothic myself, but I could probably pick out quite a bit of it
Yeah.
knowing Old English and Old Norse.
Yeah, there's a lot of commonality, and it seems like
Yeah.
a perfect blend of the two in a lot of ways.
Mm.
Shared words and so forth. And I borrowed words, but I didn't. I'm not a linguist, and I didn't try to translate Gothic in any way or come up with phrasing. I didn't do the thing that John Gwynne did with Old Norse, and which is very cool, but I just didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't feel competent enough to try and do that on the page with Gothic. So
yeah, I think he even had some help, a linguist or someone to do the Irish in The Faithful and the Fallen, and
right,
the Icelandic in
right,
the Bloodsworn trilogy. So, which I love too, of course, being
yeah,
a language geek and all of that. So,
right.
but very cool. And I guess we can't really say yet, but I feel like, and I said this in my review, that we're going to meet. I mean, we're kind of dancing around the Romans a little bit here, right?
Oh yeah,
We've been dancing around. We've been with the Gotari and then the Scolani and all these others. And I feel like we might get a more, although probably not in its best days, I'm guessing, but a more advanced civilization that might be
absolutely.
Roman based.
I
Yeah.
don't want to go too far away, but yeah, I mean it's probably fairly clear, and even in my website, I describe briefly books 2 and 3, and yeah, you meet Greeks and Romans whom I've renamed.
Yeah.
Hellenes, which is very close to,
Yeah, Greek. Yeah.
and then for the Romans, I just wanted enough space and distance so that everybody knows so much about, or a lot of people know so much about Rome, that I wanted just enough of a gap there. So I renamed them Tiberians.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And their realm is the Tiberian Empire, and they are currently at war with the Sassanidi Empire, which is loosely based on Persians.
Yep, that's what I figured. Yeah.
And so Pontia is in the crossroads of that war,
Right.
and coming down from the north are Germanic tribes, and intersecting with the civilized world is kind of the idea of the setting for as we move forward.
That period. Interesting. Wow. Cool. Oh, I love it. I love all these influences, and that's a particularly fascinating time in history too, with so much in flux. And
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And the Goths played a huge role in the, not particularly in the fall of Rome, but I mean, they were part of that, all that, but they had
part of it in the earlier stages of it for sure.
right. They were already immersed into Roman culture, and I one of the things that I read very early on that about the Goths was about Alaric, who was the Gothic leader. He called himself a king, some didn't, but he had been the first to lay siege to the city of Rome, and one of his big gripes was that they had never fully paid him for fighting for the Romans in the Battle of Frigidus, where he lost 20,000 of his men.
Wow.
He went in there with estimated 45,000 men and lost almost half of them fighting for Rome. And Rome sent his units forth when their usurper was who they were trying to root out. And the usurper had the high ground, and the Romans knew it, and they sent their Gothic forces in to basically wiped out so that they could come in afterward and clean up. And that was one of Alaric's long-standing beefs. And and he went and he said, "Pay me." And I thought, wow, that is a cool story.
Yeah,
I got to get to that someday.
Yeah, well, that's a legitimate beef, I would say. Yeah. So, well, excellent. And let's talk about themes a little bit too, then.
Okay.
Because you have some wonderful ones in here. And I think it's probably enough on the historical and other influences, although I could keep going all day on this. But I love some of the themes you have in here. One being identity, I think it's fair to say. and how there are very momentous events sometimes that change who we are and how we relate to the world around us. And sometimes these things are external, they happen from outside, there's not much we can do. And sometimes they're big decisions that we have to make.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that change who our life path. And that's there's some wonderful examples in the story. We're not doing spoilers yet, but some really great examples in The Severing Son of characters put in these situations where they become someone else. And so that is something I think that you've done really well in here.
Well, thank you. Good. I liked playing around with sort of the weight of external expectation and trying to stay true to one's true self. And I don't think it's spoilery to say, but one of the ways it happens in chapter 1 that I wanted to establish Valdan's true self is through his carving.
Yes. It's a wonderful detail.
I just thought through something we do creatively, that's how we express ourselves or who we really are. And I thought, well, that can be ground zero. Actually, I should mention, because she'll probably watch this, but I have a fantastic developmental editor that's been working with me for years. And she's told me that I needed to come up with something like that. I mean, she just said, we need something to establish Valdan's base self, who we
great advice, really great advice.
And she's kind of my AP. Like if you you have AP and I had Therese Walsh. And
does she cast fireballs?
Unfortunately, no. And maybe not unfortunately, but she's not a nemesis like person at all. But she's been instrumental in bringing this story to life, and she's been with me for many years through several iterations of this story. But she's also I'm a contributor at Writer Unboxed.
Yes.
And have been for over a decade, and she is the founder and editor-in-chief of Writer Unboxed. And at some point along the line, she said, send me your manuscript. And I said, what? And she goes, I'll read your manuscript. And I was blown away, and so I remain so grateful for that. But I since have hired her more than once, and she has done the trilogy, the Sundered Nation Trilogy, and she was instrumental in getting it to the point where it is. So I just wanted to take a second to say that. But
that's wonderful. Yeah, and I would just kind of piggybacking on that. I would say anyone out there who's thinking of writing, you need somebody like that.
Yeah.
You really do, because the developmental editor is going to help you make your story better. And I know it's not cheap. It is a big investment. But it makes a huge difference to have somebody who has a great sense of storytelling look over your work and say, you know what, you need this here. You could use something. This might improve this part of the story. This might,
in little ways, they change everything. It's a ripple effect every time.
Yep. That's well said. Yeah. So that's wonderful that you've had that relationship, and I think it's vital, actually, if you can have something like that for your writing. And I think that's a wonderful piece of advice about having Valdan having something creative as part of his identity. And that's something that obviously we're dealing with a culture very much in flux, but there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of internal and external threats. And so for someone to be able to nurture a creative side of themselves in the midst of all that, where the demand, particularly for a young man, is to be a warrior, to be strong, to be violent. And that's another theme in here, is violence. And you have characters who struggle with their inner natures. And what am I? I mean, when I'm in the situation of violence, I lose control of myself, and I become something possessed,
Yeah.
and it just makes you look at yourself in an entirely different way to be thrown into a situation like that, life, life or death, and suddenly you become something you had no idea you had inside you.
Yeah. And then to have the expectation of living up to your sires, and and in this case, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say Valdan is raised to be a leader. I mean,
Right.
he's expected to take on a mantle.
A lot of expectations.
Yeah. So the weight of expectation and the internal struggle about that as a young man, and really all the characters struggle with their expectations for how their life was going to go, or what they thought they wanted,
Mm.
and what circumstance puts upon them.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Speaking of which, I think another great theme in here is how we view the other, how someone who is just so completely foreign and not even maybe human can become human through contact, through interaction, and maybe more than just human, but a friend, an ally, a comrade,
Right.
maybe even a lover. So there's all these ways in which I think through wonderful stories like this, through fantasy settings, we can experience that truth that in the world we live in, there are a lot of people outside of our little tribes, but when you come to meet them and you know them, you realize there's a whole lot of things we have in common.
Yeah.
There are a lot of universalities that bind us together, much more than the differences.
Yeah. And I wanted to pull that in as I move forward. I wanted to, and I always was, one of the things that I loved about multi POV stories is seeing all sides of a conflict. I thought Pillars of the Earth did a good job of that, in different angles and aspects, and so I loved the concept of it, and as the series moves along, I do more and more of that.
Great.
And including people who are going to be described as villains, antagonists, and from an antagonist, of course, is the hero of his own story.
Yep.
And I did a little bit of that with Des Drusen in this book, who's a character who's not necessarily a protagonist.
Not maybe the most lovable character in this.
And I do it with others in the future, and I've always gotten good response from advanced readers on that, and I think it really makes you think. And I was never, even though Tolkien was one of my foundational sources, I don't ever portray good and evil in a simple way.
Yeah,
and I've always aspired to show the complexity of that.
absolutely. And there are moments in there when the antagonist has a point about some aspect of the protagonist, a kind of very valid point, actually.
For example, we never did get to the Carpins.
Oh yes, the Carpins. Yes,
the Carpins are a displaced people.
Yeah.
The Gatari have taken their land and
Right.
don't think twice about it.
In fact, they review them as subhuman.
Yeah. And and the Carpins are very loosely based on the Carpi people who are from the Carpathian mountain range. And the gold thing is a real thing, that they had a hidden source of gold. And the Romans wrote about this often, that they didn't know where the Carpi were getting all of their gold, and that there must be some vast gold mine somewhere that they had hidden. And so what I did was I tied the Carpin people I just tied the gold into their religion, sort of, to make it a reason to protect it and keep these heathens away from it.
Yeah, I remarked on that briefly in my review, that I got the sense that there are some past injustices
Yeah.
that are very much a piece of the present, that are very much behind the current situation. And it's not, as you said before, we're all the heroes of our own narrative, and we belong to a particular culture, and we tend to validate or even lionize whatever that culture does and glorify whatever it has done in the past. But in fact, it's just possible that if you look at it from another perspective, some of these actions that we glorify might even be pretty unethical, or
Yeah.
even evil, in some cases. So,
And Dalton's father was very much seen as a hero, but we know that he was not heroic to the other groups you're mentioning. And that's history, so it's backstory. But yeah, that's
yeah,
a very big part of this setup, the scenario for the world.
yeah. So that's really well done. The
Thank
fact that
you.
you've woven all of that in there, just tremendous. So yeah, congratulations on getting those in there, because it's not the easiest thing to do. I don't know, did you think about these themes ahead of time and
Yeah.
say, I need to weave these in, or did they sort of organically emerge in the course of the?
Very organically. I think you and I have compared notes a little bit, just in writing, that we've both spent well over a decade at this.
Yeah,
And in the beginning, I in writing circles, they call you a pantser or a plotter. Pantser is someone who just writes by the seat of their pants.
yeah, not
And
me.
I am not a plotter, though. I'm more so now, but in the beginning, I was writing by the seat of my pants, and I kept asking myself, where is all this coming from? Of course, now I can look back on it and see, oh, this from the far pavilions, I took this, and from John Jakes, I took this, and all that stuff is up there brewing around in your subculture or your subconscious.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it comes out in the form of storytelling. And the themes for me were something that I very much had to look back upon completed drafts to see what I was trying to do or say, and
yeah.
then to go back through. I mean, this is why it took so many rewrites. For example, the Carpin people did not exist until, I would say, at least 5 or 6 years into writing these in this story world.
Wow,
It
wow.
just did not exist. And I had the Spali from the jump, but and the Scolani were always there. But yeah, I added layers and I thought, well, of course there were these other groups that were there, and of course, if a Germanic tribe migrated to this river valley, then someone had
Somebody
to
was
live there
there.
before. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these things were added over time and to address thematic issues, I would say, mostly.
Uh-huh.
And it tried to deepen the story and make it richer. And um,
So you
yeah,
were able to emphasize the themes a little more in the course of revising.
exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And once you know what you're trying to do, and in my case, I tend, in the beginning especially, I tended to overwrite. Like I would, oh, I'm trying to say this, and then I would write a whole draft that was overemphasizing some aspect or
Oh
theme,
yeah. Yeah,
and then
yeah.
I was, I got to reel that back a little bit, or someone would read it for me and say, you kind of, putting the thumb on the scale here, or preaching, and then, oh, you're right, you're right. And so it took me a lot of years to fine tune this, and I've been great in that I've had great mentors throughout,
Yeah.
and great friends who've read and read and read and read for me. Mostly met through Writer Unboxed, but yeah. And hi everybody. they've
Yeah.
all they've all been with me, and now they're all cheering for me, and it just feels great because so many of them have seen such an evolution for this story.
That's wonderful. Yeah, let's do a little plug for Writer Unboxed. What is the organization? Can you tell people a little bit about it?
Yeah, it is for writers about the craft and the business of writing fiction. We're mostly novelists. And it's been around since 2008. It was founded by Therese Walsh and another woman who's not active in it anymore named Kathleen Bolton. And they were both aspiring writers when they founded it, a blog site primarily.
Okay.
And it was what they started doing, which I am astounded by in the beginning, was just started publishing a daily essay. And we're 5 days a week minimum, and we're mostly 6 days a week. But we have, I think, around 40 contributors, and
Wow.
we have extremely experienced novelists who've been multiple published and award-winning novelists like Barbara O'Neill, and we have an agent. We have Donald Moss, who does a lot of craft instruction as well as running his own agency. And
Yep. I've heard of Donald Moss. Yeah.
and we have Ray Ramey, who was the founder of Flog. What's his blog? Oh, I'm sorry, Ray. Flog. It's something about flogging your opening. I can't think. It's a catchy name, and I can't remember it. But anyway,
it's something about revising, right? Yeah.
You could send your first pages in, and everybody would critique them, rip them apart.
Oh, neat. Okay. Yeah.
But he does that same thing for us monthly it's called Flog a Pro on Writer in Box, where he'll take a best-selling novel and you blindly read it and you rate it as a writer, and then he reveals who it is. You press a button on the blog and it reveals who.
Oh, wow.
What book and who this is. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Sounds like a really great community.
Yeah. And we've since the blog was kind of grew in success, we founded a Facebook group, and there's also a large Twitter community, and we have a group of us who tweet regularly as Writer Unboxed. And we pull rating sources from all over the internet for you on Twitter and gather them in one spot. Cool. And there is a conference as well, which we just finished. This year, it was our first time doing it online rather than in person. Normally, we call it the Uncon because it's unboxed. It's an unconference. And we normally hold that in Salem, Massachusetts.
Salem, Mass. Okay.
Yeah. So there's my Writer Unboxed spiel for you.
Nice. Very nice. It sounds like a really great community.
Good group.
Good resources, great support system. Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, now I think we're going to segue into some spoilers here, because I have some questions. I have some gushing to do about specific moments from The Severing Sun. So everybody, this is your warning, fair warning. The spoilers are coming. If you haven't read The Severing Sun, thank you so much for staying up until now, and or stay if you like. If you're tolerant of spoilers, that's good too. You are most welcome to stay. Personally, I don't mind spoilers as much as most people.
I don't either. I don't mind them as much, but thanks for everybody who's leaving.
Yes, thank you to all of you if you are leaving. So one of the things that just leaped out to me when I was reading The Severing Sun, and I have to talk about this scene, is the duel scene. Oh, it's just so good. And
thanks.
And so unexpected, because you think you've seen every possible kind of duel. You know, if you've read a lot of fantasy, you've watched a lot of movies, you've seen it all, right?
Yeah.
Well, you got me here. This was really, really good. This was a duel that was resolved in a way that caught me by surprise in a good way. So the duel, of course, is between Valdon and Tivar. So such a wonderful moment in this story, a moment of growth for Valdon, who is on this journey of, I guess it is a coming of age thing, but it's also vengeance for him. There's a lot wrapped up in this, but this is a really maturing moment, I think, for him.
It's definitely his big leap forward, and it's him believing in himself for the first time, sort of, and seeing how his connection to Elan is vital to his growth, and he realizes it. And
she's his kestrel.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the advantage I had on this was I knew, I don't know if I've said it, but I wrote the story of the children before I wrote. This is, for me, was a prequel story that I had finished writing a story about the progeny of this group of characters.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
And
okay.
T-Bar was a guy that I knew as an elderly gentleman. So I guess that's a spoiler because
Well, we're in the spoilers now. So
you now know that T-Bar lives
yeah.
for quite a while. But he was this he had kind of a grizzled aspect to him, very laconic, very rare to speak. And when he does, it usually has import. And he's a giant. He's literally one of the largest men that most people ever meet in their lives.
Yeah.
And so I knew him, and I was telling a backstory thing about him, and he was talking about Valdan, and he said, in the beginning we weren't friends. And so I had to go back to that and go from there. And I knew that they were both in the Amalis clan. And so that's how the story of the duel came about. And I had to get to a point where they both survived it and become friends. I knew they became friends afterwards. So.
Well, and it's a great friendship, and one of the things I enjoyed here a lot were the friendships, the relationships formed.
And I thought that getting to that moment where they both showed the respect for one another and the mercy, how can they? I just said to myself, how can we accomplish this where they both have this respect?
It's
and
mutual. Yeah. And the fact that they come in the course of a violent confrontation to grow this respect and to ultimately come out of it in unison, and acting together is really cool. The way that comes about, it's really nice.
I love their relationship, and I played around with it a lot, but it's one of those things that, just having him always there is one of my favorite things. And I like the fact that I try to make, when he speaks, I like it to mean something, to try to make him resonate a little bit, because he doesn't talk very often.
But when he does, it's important. So neat. Well, speaking of relationships, of course, the central relationship in this story, without even nothing comes close, is Valdan and Elan. And this is something that I wasn't sure at first exactly where this was going to go. I knew that she was going to be a mentor, obviously, and a protector. That was her assumed role. That was her sacred duty, in fact.
Right.
It was to protect him. And she had sort of volunteered for this, but sort of got coerced into it.
Well, I think part of Elan's psyche is she doesn't even see the ways that she volunteered. She doesn't quite accept responsibility for everything that she steps into until she's called out on it much later in the story.
I think she's in a bit of denial too about her nurturing side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because her mother is a healer, of course, and that is something that I think she's tried not to be, to be more of a warrior than a healer. That healing thing seems to be in her as well.
And I think it's the fact that she wants so badly to be a warrior is due to the fact she was bullied as a child.
Yep. As a response,
it was her way of saying, I'm going to stand up to this, even if it kills me. I'm going to be among the best warriors and ride with the best warriors, and fear me, because you will no longer bully me.
I think she's my favorite character in the book.
Oh, good.
She's fantastic. Just a wonderful character. And since we're doing spoilers, that's her. With her friend. Yeah.
Hrittvara.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. I mean, just she springs right off the page. I love her. There's plenty of conflict. One thing you do really well, by the way, with your characters is you introduce a lot of conflict within them. And conflict is at the heart of the relationship between Valdan and Ilan, because she's got this whole, I mean, well, she's living in the Skolani culture, of course. There's a certain level of commitment to a man is forbidden. So this is not cool.
Right.
And so she's very much in denial, but also even when she begins to understand this relationship and it's really fascinating because she does go from mentor to potential lover, I guess. And there's a lot of resistance,
Yeah.
from her part because of her own cultural restrictions, or the role she sees herself in. So that's a really big deal to leave your own culture behind for a person.
Yeah.
For an individual. That is a really big deal.
One of the things I loved about the Skolani is it's like taking something in real life and emphasizing it, like the whole restriction on outsiders and duty and all that stuff. It is just like taking the things we all feel to another level. Like they have a lot of pressure on them to behave in certain ways, and of course they have very human feelings. So even though a lot of the Guattari believe that they're kind of unfeeling and cold, they're humans.
Right.
So in Elan in particular, you're right. She is a healer's heart because of her mother. And the relationship she develops and the feelings she develops for Valdan have to be, either she would have to walk away with regret or accept them and move forward. So it was definitely, and I wanted to make it something that felt like, even as you read those final chapters, I hope readers are kind of torn themselves as to what she should do. Should she go with him, or should she stay?
And it's
of
not
course,
a
Iconis is as a part of all this too. It's just knowing that Iconis was such an influence on her life and such a powerful presence in her world. This is a Skolani princess who takes Elan under her wing at a very young age and kind of keeps the bullies away from her.
But also they're lovers too.
Yeah, they are lovers as well. And then they sign up for something in the Skolani culture that is called near sisterhood,
right?
Which is more or less just a commitment to one another. It's not necessarily a you don't have to be lovers to be near sisters. In fact, most aren't, I believe, in the way I've written it. But it's a commitment to one another, and they've done this. And but Elan wants her own day in the sun, so to speak, and so that's where we meet her.
Well, the relationship with Iconis is definitely not one of equals, and that is something that rubs, I think, Elan the wrong way.
Most definitely.
And it's something that I loved Iconis too. She's a larger than life figure. You can't help but admire this woman, but at the same time, I think she does tend to mistreat Elan in some ways, and not. I don't think intentionally or in an abusive way necessarily, but there is an extent to which she enjoys her position of superiority over her, and
it's
a kind of arrogance there
held in all of her culture with everyone, is they all basically must look up to her, and and she likes having Elan as kind of under my wing. Elan is mine, and you
And
know,
you get the
that,
sense that her intervention wasn't entirely altruistic.
right.
It's like, oh, I can have a pet here, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
something.
And Iconis is another character that I've known since should I say? I guess it's okay. I've known Iconis since the beginning of my journey. He's one of the very first characters I ever wrote, and man, I mean, I get a little choked up because
Yeah.
I've known her for 18 years.
Wow. Yeah.
I did not know Alan then.
Interesting.
Alan came over time, but yeah, and Iconis was a warrior queen, and she was the very first POV I wrote for a Scolani character.
Wow. That is a nice piece of information to know. And
It's
she
kind of
is
spoilery a little bit, sorry, but yeah,
not really, and she is certainly formidable. I will say that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanted her to be a badass. I wanted her to be a little bit full of herself, but I also, you know, that's always when you find those characteristics, quite often there's that's covering up for something else. That's armor.
Yeah.
And you kind of see glimpses of that, I think, in young Iconis.
Interesting.
That you know, this is the armor she puts on every day, is that I am the baddest, period. No one will ever take that from me. No one can deny it. No one can argue with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't either.
You're right. I would
wouldn't.
never really.
I'm not going to argue with her.
Yeah. People ask, would you ever want to meet your characters? I go, well.
I would want to meet Elon. She's
Yeah.
And Valdan too, because I'd want to
Yeah.
just sort of put him aside and try to give him a little advice. And
Yeah.
he's really trying to figure things out, the poor guy.
He is.
He's in a lot of pain. He's trying to be the man now that he's lost his parents tragically.
Yeah.
And he's got these younger siblings to take care of, and this weight of responsibility. And
people sometimes complain about the loss of parents thing, but it's so perfect for character development in a fantasy story like this, to step out and become your own person.
But it's a different spin on it too, though, because I feel like a lot of the times the character starts out as an orphan. And you know, so most of the time the character starts as an orphan or has already lost a parent or something, whereas you've got him pretty much grown up at the time when he loses his parents. And you know, it happens a lot in a lot of fantasy. If you're a parent, watch out, you're probably going to die halfway through the book, you know.
Exactly.
So
sorry, parents.
That's your role at a certain point, is to fuck it. So but no, his journey is really tremendous, and his discovery, and it's not all necessarily good either. There are certain moments when I'm like, Valdan, no, you don't want to go there. And the stuff that he's tapping into, you know, it's interesting because there are all these prophecies around him too, and I feel like I'm kind of like trying to peel back the layers here and read what your intention is, but I feel like we don't necessarily trust prophecy. We shouldn't necessarily trust prophecy, even if the characters believe in it. Because it has a way of people kind of make it happen the way they want to, or that sort of thing. So
even when people say that things have lined up with the prophecy, you as the reader can stand back and go,
wait a second,
that could have just happened anyway. I mean, that probably was the way it was going to happen, no matter prophecy or no.
Right.
You know, and I definitely, as a theme, I think I just wanted my characters to be able to step back from dogmatic views and maybe zealotry a little bit, like you know, you can think for yourself, even if you know someone says this is going to happen. You know, I don't know if that's a good thing to base your decision-making process on, or your life So yeah, that's definitely built into, that's cooked in thematically from the get-go. And that was one of the things I had to look back and say, oh, this is I'm just, it's part of my religious background. I had very zealous religious grandparents in particular. Um, and everything was hell and brimstone. I mean, and it's frightening as a child to think,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
you know, we're doomed. It's, you know, so
Yeah.
I know that's kind of baked into the I say urinin. I've heard a lot of other people lately saying urinin, which is fine with me. I
Sounds
don't
cool.
mind any pronunciation change or anything. However you're saying it in your head is right, as far as I'm
Cool.
concerned.
Cool. And
But
yeah, you do have religious figures in here, seeresses like Amasila.
yeah,
Is that how
yeah,
you say it?
she's a priestess because of her foresight.
And she
And
believes, by the way, I believe she believes in
she
her.
believes she's hearing Freya's voice.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how I always had it in my head, is that she's got something going on, and whatever it is, okay, you do you. But enough people believed in her to make her a central figure in what happens. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Well, I feel like we could do a lot more here, but I am slightly under the weather. You probably could tell I've been coughing
Yeah.
here and
Sorry
there,
about
but
that.
oh no, I mean I'm getting better. I'll be over this soon enough. But this was an opportunity I did not want to miss, discussing the Severing Sun with you, Vaughn. This has been
It's been
such a
great.
joy, such a privilege to discuss this with you, to read your book. Congratulations on
Thank you.
finishing this. This is just fantastic. And everybody, go buy the book. It's wonderful. It's nice floppy paperback too. So
Can I just say before we go, I got to thank you, Philip, for that first review for me, and it was just I had a fantastic opening. Release day was wonderful, and a lot of people supporting me, and a lot of it is due to you. And I think what you do for the self-pub community is fantastic, and I know that it's not something that gets you a lot of views. So those of us who you've helped, we really appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts. I know I do, and I just can't thank you enough, because it's just been wonderful.
well, thank you. That means a lot. That really means an awful lot. And I do it for the joy of it. This is definitely a passion for me. And so if it does anybody any good at all, then I'm very happy. So thank you once again, Vaughn. It's been a joy. And thank you, everybody, if you've made it this far. And once again, check out his book. It's available in other formats as well as an ebook, right? And you're going to
ebook on Amazon, and then Barnes and Noble for the paperback. We're still having a little trouble with the paperback on Amazon, but it is readily available. IndieBound has it as well. But anyway, Barnes and Noble is shipping now. So
cool. All right. Well, there it is. And hopefully Amazon will get it together soon. But thank you so much, everybody. And until next time.